What if depression is on your side? What if depression is your internal helper trying to give you a message in a very difficult way? What if depression is kind of championing you to become someone completely different? What if depression has meaning? The solution to the pain is in the pain.
Now then, welcome to Reconnect, the podcast for people who want to heal and grow from life's tough times. I'm Joe Tudor, the founder of the Reconnect Club and a mental health keynote speaker. Today, I'm chatting with James Scurry, a psychotherapist, journalist, and the co-founder of the charity Safely Held Spaces. We'll be talking about finding the solution to our pain, why our brains probably aren't broken, and how we can find hope. Right, here's James. Why would someone do this work?
So it's a really good question. I think as a psychotherapist, I see how difficult it is for people to go towards the pain, to move towards, the thing that's at the root cause of why they feel depressed, why they're feeling anxious, why they're really struggling. What I would say, Joe, is that you're already in pain. Okay, so that's the key thing to understand. You're already in pain. And so what I've understood from my time working in mental health and also from my own personal journey is that it hurts a lot less to do the work, to do the internal journey and to get to the bottom of why you're actually struggling. It hurts a lot more to ignore it. So it's a bit like a car. So you hear the kind of clink under the bonnet and you think to yourself, oh God, I'm going to have to spend some money here. It's going to cost me. And you think, oh, it's probably nothing, right? So you just ignore it. But deep down that the car started to make a noise and you've got to pay some attention and it's probably time to take it to a mechanic. I think without being too without making things confusing with a metaphor about mechanics, because I don't think a human body is like a car, but I think it is true that we do need to listen to the internal message. So when a little noise starts to go off inside us, that little noise might be something like depression or feeling slightly different or anxiety, panic attacks. When those things start to first appear, that's the kind of warning light going off on the dashboard. So it's time then to go inside and figure out what's going on. And the sooner that somebody does that, the sooner that we do it, the quicker we can get to, getting back to a place of more balanced well-being.
I think I ignored my warning light for so long, and I've just thrown the difficult question at you at the start, but I want to go right back. So you're originally from Australia.
Originally from Australia. I lived in the UK since 2009.
What brought you to London?
So yeah, that's a good question. So what I would say is that in my youth, in my 20s, I was quite into the rave scene, and the end of my time in Australia was quite a kind of hedonistic period, dare I say. So I left Australia to study in France, and it pushed me onto a completely different pathway. One which I might call a spiritual pathway, but with a little S. So spiritual, I just mean by spiritual, like trying to find meaning somewhere else outside of a nightclub. And so I went to study in France and was starting to really unravel. So there was panic attacks. I remember having a panic attack in the middle of central Paris. It felt like the whole of the city was kind of going to cave in on me. And I was studying international relations at a university there. So I'd gone over on a program and was learning to speak French, living with a French family. So it was kind of hard to explain in French what was happening to me. So France was really, in some ways, my savior because it got me away from the very toxic world I'd ended up in Australia. And there's a whole trauma history I subsequently uncovered as to why I was reaching for things like, alcohol. But Paris really did save me, I think, in terms of it was a place where I could just unravel slightly and I was away from other people that might have taken me back into that world of wanting to numb it. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, I didn't want to go home to Australia. I wanted to stay overseas, and the only other place that I could live was the UK because my grandparents are from Stoke. So yeah, I've got a bit of I'm slightly British. I'd say I'm even more British now, a bit of a mix of Aussie and British. But I came to the UK because Australia had become a bad place for me and I wasn't ready to go back to that. and I've been here now for around about 15 years.
Well, selfishly, I'm glad you're here in the UK. And it's really hard to picture that the older you, or the younger you, sorry, I should say, knowing you now. I really relate to what you said about panic attacks and being in another country. I left university and went traveling, and I kind of like traveling with a little T. I like your example there because, to be honest, we just wanted to go and get pissed by a nice beach, and that was our agenda, and that's what we did. So for 30 days straight, I just drank, partied, had a great time. I was like early 20s. Then my friend went home and I was by myself, and I found myself in Thailand, and I could not understand what was going on. And I really feel that I couldn't imagine explaining that to someone in another language. Like, fortunately, I was in a hostel where people spoke English. I couldn't even explain to myself what was going on.
Mhm.
And that was a really tough experience for me. And I think that was the first really strong sign that there was something, that there were strong feelings inside of me that I didn't understand.
Mhm. It's nice to hear you say that there were strong feelings inside of me that I didn't understand, because so often I hear that's when I realized something was wrong. And so, like, maybe if I could set the tone slightly for this podcast in terms of what I've come to understand and what I believe, both as a clinician and as somebody who's gone through this journey personally, is that there was something inside of me that was right and that I had been living wrong. And so it was this kind of corrective inner compass that was pushing me back onto pushing me perhaps on for the first time, even onto a good pathway. There's a limit to what you can do to your mind and your body before you push yourself too far. And so I'm really thankful that I ended up on this pathway that I'm on now, where I get to help others who are on a mental health journey and struggling to perhaps understand where to find resources and what to do.
Yes, I really relate to the panic attacks. What other ways did these feelings inside of you come out?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a long period of my life, 2017. Maybe let's look at a 10-year period, for example. So over that 10-year period, there were many different things I felt. It wasn't just a panic attack, and that was the main thing I was working with in terms of what we might call a mental health presentation. I worked with extreme anxiety. So there was periods where I probably would have qualified for what we might call anxiety and general anxiety disorder. And I did end up using antidepressants for a period of around about a year until I decided that I wanted to figure out why I was feeling that way. So I don't have an opinion on medication one way or another. I think medication is a tool, and I think that it's up to people to use it in whatever way helps them. But for me personally, and I think it was my partner at the time said, "Don't you want to understand why you're feeling? Like, don't you want to get to the root cause?" And that was like a kind of revelation to me that, oh, there's a root cause to this. I never thought about that. Like, yeah, I know that I'm being able to kind of manage the symptoms and keep myself on an even keel by using the antidepressants. But what if I could just not need to use the antidepressants at all anymore? What if I could actually get to the root cause? So that was the big revelation for me. So to answer your question, it was, things like panic and anxiety towards the beginning, and then and later on it got quite dark when I was working as a news producer for a news channel, and working overnight shifts, and I was finding that I was unable to sleep. And then I moved into a place where I would say for a couple of days I was almost on the border of feeling suicidal. So it did move into that really, really difficult place. And thankfully, I reached out to my mom, to others that were in my circle, and very quickly moved into the strategy of actually trying to figure out what I could do. And I can talk a bit about Buddhism and what ended up happening after that experience of suicidality. But it was never as bad as perhaps some people experience. So I wouldn't want to linger too much on that. Mostly it was really anxiety, extreme distress inside my body, and feeling like a lot of catastrophizing, a lot of thinking, I'm not going to be able to afford to pay my rent in London anymore. I'm going to have to leave. I'm going to have to go back to Australia. I'm going to have to leave my partner. Everything's going to collapse. Everything's going to go Pete Tong, upside down. So it was just extreme states in my mind, extreme kind of highs and lows and everything in between. And yeah, so what happened after that was I decided to stop taking the antidepressants, and I visited a Buddhist center called Jamyang Buddhist Center in southeast London, and that was where the story really began, in that center, I think. And it's a place I still feel a huge amount of gratitude for, because it was a place that kind of really looked after me. It became a very safe place in London for me, and it's where I went to kind of be with the darkest of my internal world.
I massively appreciate you sharing the darkest of your internal world, because just listening to you talk, there's so much that I relate to, and I reckon there's so much that people listening to this podcast will relate to. And we spoke about panic attacks and the anxiety. I'll be honest, I'm still working through this now, and that's why I'm so grateful to have your support. I relate so much to that, and I find that it's as I put my head on the pillow to go to sleep, I start having really horrible thoughts, and particularly thoughts about myself. And I realised something the other night as well. When I was younger, I used to joke that I'm an emotional drunk on vodka. And that was another way that these feelings from inside started to show themselves. So I would experience the anxiety, just put my head on the pillow, be really tired, and then it would start. When I drink, it will come out. There's so many ways that these messages come out. And that's why I think it's fascinating to have you here, because you look at things in quite a different way from what the mainstream message says.
Yeah, I think that was probably the Buddhist center that taught me that, actually, because I went looking for something different quite early on. And I'm not Buddhist, and at that point I wasn't really using a spiritual tradition. I was just trying to find somewhere that smelt nice and was warm, really. And the Buddhist center looked kind of like quite cozy. It had a heated floor. It still does. I think it's quite a nice center with wooden floorboards. And when you're feeling really terrible, to walk into a space that's really quiet, that's warm, that's, where there's care and attention given to the mind, it was exactly what I needed. And I remember I wasn't sleeping at the time. So I was on night shifts with a big news channel, pulling 12, 13-hour days, starting at 11 p.m. in the evening and finishing at 10 the next day. And I could fall asleep on the train on the way home with a drop of a hat. But as soon as I got into bed, it was like, as soon as my head hit the pillow, it was like all of the panic started, all of the anxiety started, and I would start sweating. And of course, you can't sleep in that state. Now, as a clinician, I understand that I was in the midst of trauma-affected sleep, and there's a whole raft of things that can be done for a person in that situation. But of course, I just thought that I was going completely mad. And I thought, I'd broken my brain and ruined my life, and was beating myself up thinking, that everything's never going to be the same again. So I remember going to the Buddhist center and learning to meditate, and just learning to sit with some of these emotions with a bit more of a kind of expanded kind of awareness. So not getting like fixated on things, but just like learning to kind of watch things and to be interested in what they felt like, and to kind of not attach a story of, well, everything's going to go wrong, or to catastrophize. I learned to kind of sit on the edge of those feelings and just be with these experiences. But I remember the moment where it kind of all shifted for me. It was a meditation teacher who was in the center, and I sort of took him aside after the class, with tears in my eyes, almost kind of going, I'm a mess. I'm not sleeping. And I remember he just looked me in the eyes, and he said, no, your ego's just really at the fore at the moment. Like, it's going to be okay. Like, it's fine. And I didn't even understand what he meant at the time, but what he did was something really, really important. He gave me like hope. Like he gave me a different story, and I took it and I ran with it. And I was like, okay, this guy is smart. Like, he understands the mind. He's studied, what I would call Buddhism, the science of the mind, the science of the body and mind. It's a very kind of deep, ancient tradition. They get the mechanics of what goes on inside a human being. And this guy thinks my ego's at the fore. I don't know what he means, but I'm going to run with that story. I think what he meant was I was kind of stuck in a very rigid understanding of who I was. And it was kind of breaking apart. And I was kind of trying to hold on to something that was crumbling, because I'd kind of outgrown it. It's kind of like trying to stay in a jumper, we say jumper in Australia, in a sweatshirt, right? When you've outgrown it, and it's like, it's so tight, it's just take it off. It doesn't fit you anymore. It's not the right piece of clothing to be wearing. That was like my version of me. It was so outdated and rigid. It needed to just kind of crumble. That process of crumbling was very uncomfortable. I wish I'd known at the time that it was actually a really important, meaningful thing that was happening to me and that I wasn't sick. But unfortunately, there was no one there to tell me that besides this one meditation teacher.
So the process for crumbling for you, that was when you sleep, when you felt panic attack,
Yeah.
you felt the dark thoughts, and having that meditation teacher around was the person that gave you hope.
He was the first seed. So like then I decided that I wanted to kind of figure out what else was out there. So I started having Buddhist psychotherapy. So I was like, okay, well, the Buddhist meditation teacher clearly has made me feel better by telling me that I'm not sick and that there's a way to get out of this. So I'm going to find a Buddhist psychotherapist. So I found one in North London and went to see him. And I wouldn't say that the sessions were particularly amazing. It was an opportunity for me to talk for the first time. It's the first time I'd ever been in anywhere near a kind of psychotherapist or counselor. But very quickly, I remember waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning and thinking, why don't I become a psychotherapist? Like, it was kind of like a light bulb moment because I thought, like, well, I quite like this therapy thing. This Buddhist psychotherapist seems like he's kind of got some understanding of things. So what I did is I went onto his website and saw that he trained at an institute called the Karuna Institute in Devon, which is one of the only institutes in the world which combines Eastern traditions of the body and mind, so Buddhist understandings of the body and mind, with Western psychotherapy. So I ended up going and doing a foundation training and signed up for the master's degree. And so that was then the next 5 years of my life was this institute in Devon, learning to be psychotherapist somewhere between the East and the West, swimming in the middle of the river, really. And that was where I really started to understand this whole area that we call mental health and how there's a whole other way of understanding things that's just becoming very popular now that I think it's a really exciting time for people who are struggling, because what if you're not sick, right? What if the narrative could be something completely different? And this is actually the beginning of a really important journey of self-discovery and transformation. And that's not everyone's journey and that's not everyone's story. But I think if you're prepared to do a little bit of internal work, you're not afraid of legs day. I like to say, if you're not afraid of legs day at the gym and you get that pain is for a reason, then the pain of therapy, the pain of doing the internal emotional work will pay dividends if you agree to go on that journey. And I agreed. And I'm glad I did. That's why you and I are now sitting here today.
I'm really glad you did. And I had a similar experience. I pushed at the start of, I was 26 when I first really had a strong experience of depression. As mentioned, there were warning signs started in Thailand, but probably even further back. But I thought this stuff was a bit hippie. I'm not going to lie. If you'd have showed me this, 6 years ago, I'd be like, that's not me. But when I spent time in Asia, I really learned how much the wisdom there is there. Like, so there's people that just sat in the cave for 20 years thinking about the mind. It's like, to think we can't learn from that. For me to think, oh, they're hippies, I can't learn from that. I think I hold my hands up, I was wrong with that. And there's loads. And one of the things that you've said that I really relate to was that the Buddhist meditations, and again, it sounds like I'm selling Buddhism. I'm not Buddhist either. I've just found it really helpful. It helped me understand my suffering and it gave context. And it was that context that when I was told I had a disorder and a disease, the context was taken away. And that prevented me from working with these feelings and to try and figure out where else I could go.
So nobody can write your story or nobody can know your story. And if you look to an expert to try and tell you something as complicated as what's going on in your mind, after all of the years that you've lived on the earth and all of the experiences you've had, as if we could kind of export that decision to a professional that we might have been sitting with for 15 to 30 minutes or however long it is in a mental health assessment. I would agree with you, Joe, that everything that worked for me along the way, and there's been lots and lots of different things that have helped, everything that worked, my initial response to it when I first heard about it was, this is bullshit.
Wow.
Yeah. So every single thing that I thought was bullshit ended up working. And so what I would say to anyone listening to this thinking what I'm saying is bullshit is suspend disbelief just for a tick, just for a little bit, suspend disbelief and just contemplate the possibility that maybe there's some stuff that does work, that does sound strange. Because, I mean, it's not rocket science. Emotions are not diseases. Psychology is not some kind of illness. We feel things that are very, very complex. Even the word like depression, I mean, we say it as though everyone experiences the exact same thing. Depression is a word to describe an enormous panoply, array, broad spectrum of different experiences. And so even when we say I experienced depression, oh, yeah, so did I, we could be talking about two different things. A woman who's in a coercive relationship with her husband and feeling depressed is not the same as a person who's just lost their grandmother, and those two experiences, if we arrived at the doctor, might be met with kind of the same response because unfortunately, there's not a lot of kind of flexibility in the system that we have at the moment, which is why it's good to look around. And fortunately, we live in the UK, which has so many things that can be used to help mental and emotional distress.
That's such a good way of putting it. And I just finished Gabor Mate's book, Dr. Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal. And he said it really well. And I'll actually like your take on this because I've often wanted a kind of one size fits all quick answer. A lot of the people around me have wanted the same, and that's understandable. It's normal. It's human. And we look to people like I look to my doctor to give me those answers. But Gabor Mate said, if you think of depression as like being in a swimming pool with a beach ball, you've got to work so hard to push it down, and it's always looking to pop back up. So I've been using that as an example when someone asks me for their own answers, and I kind of think, well, it depends what we're pushing down, and we're all pushing different things down.
Yeah, and the pushing down is the key phrase you've used there. So what about if we just let's test out one of these, surely this can't be true, that's bullshit, type ideas.
Yeah.
What if depression is on your side? What if depression is your internal helper trying to give you a message in a very difficult way? What if depression is kind of championing you to become someone completely different? What if depression is the internal messenger handing you an envelope, and that the longer you push it down, the more you refuse opening that envelope and reading the message that it has for you? What if depression has meaning?
I would say I absolutely agree with that. And the more I pushed it down, the worse I felt. The more I fought it, the worse I felt. I will never, ever forget watching the sunrise over Mount Everest and looking back, thinking to where I was a year before. A year before, I was doing a job I didn't love. I didn't really know why I did it. I loved the people. The people I worked with were amazing, but it wasn't the career that I wanted to do. I just went out drinking all the time. I loved playing football, but I looked at where I went. I ended up traveling through India and really started to understand who I am as a person. It was when I went to Nepal and watched the sunrise over Everest, and I was like, wow, this is some change. And there was another experience. The fact I'm sat here doing this podcast, I loved Sydney. I think I've told you so many times, I love being outdoors. I love the beach. I had a good job, really big technology company. I didn't have to worry about money for the first time in my life. But I felt really depressed. My sleep went, and it was really tough. It's horrible.
Yeah.
But the message in that was that I know I had to pursue something that had meaning, which is why I'm here talking to you today. Started reconnecting while we're doing this podcast. So I'd agree with that. I really would agree with that. But actually, I had a conversation right at the start of this reconnect journey with a lovely trainee psychologist. Like, she volunteered. She saw what I was doing. She volunteered to help out. And we got towards the end of this call, and she suggested that she thought I was unethical to say that depression can be an experience that you can grow from. What's your take on that?
So it's a good question. And I think it depends on what you think you're talking about when you use the word depression. So I've definitely heard people say, don't romanticize suffering. It's really, really difficult what people are going through. To try and say you can find meaning in these really debilitating, sometimes life-threatening experiences is to trivialize them, and that's unethical. And I guess as a psychologist, you're there to try and help people with their symptoms, and you ultimately do often have the idea that you're the professional there to provide treatment and that they're the patient there who's sick. my framing of depression is different. And I am a clinician as well. So albeit one who's trained in a slightly different way. I see depression as the suffering that's caused when we're not listening. It's something that's sunk down. It's the keys in the word, depression. What have we depressed? What has sunken down so deeply inside us that we've sort of perhaps not understood that it's there? And it causes us to suffer because it's the only way we'll listen. We do not pay any attention to many of the other signals that our body gives us. Pain is the one thing that will stop us in our tracks. That's its purpose. That's what pain is actually for. If you break your leg, you get signals, painful signals to tell you that something is wrong. So somewhere along the line, we've forgotten that pain is a messenger, and that doesn't change between physical pain and mental pain. Mental pain, it's the same thing. So in my take on this, and it's just my take, I hold my opinion lightly, but I offer it here in the hope that it might be useful, is that depression is a messenger. It's important to listen to it. And the more you're able to kind of tune into that inner reference point, that inner compass, and figure out what the depression is actually trying to say, then the less it's going to need to yell. It's kind of yelling to get your attention through in a really difficult way. It's making you suffer greatly. But the minute you're able to kind of figure out what it wants you to do, it doesn't need to make you suffer anymore, and it will stop. And that has been my experience consistently through my own life and through all of the people that I've worked with over 7 or 8 years of clinical work. Once you know what the depression is for, then things really begin to shift.
And again, the most amazing experiences of my life have been preceded by an experience of depression. I don't think that's chance. But the bit that's really hard is you mentioned what's it yelling out. That's the bit that I find really hard, especially at the start. Like, what is this telling me?
And that can be a bit of a journey in and of itself, I think. And sometimes it's a lot easier to just say, well, I think I'll just keep taking the antidepressants. And again, I preface that by saying, you may well keep taking the antidepressants as you do this journey. I certainly did at the beginning. And that's not to say that, medication is fine to use, but at some point you have to face yourself. And that's what I realized, that I could I could put myself through all the contortions that I wanted to put myself through, but to not feel what was inside of me. But ultimately, I was eventually going to have to, at some point, face it. And I'm really glad that I found a way to do that, because when I faced it, what I realized was that there had been a gift there waiting for me all along. And that actually this thing that I was petrified of looking at, this horrible anxiety, this pain, was actually a gateway to a place of just feeling so much better, and not doing such destructive things in my life, causing myself, what I would call dirty pain. So I have this expression, clean and dirty pain. Clean pain is legs day at the gym. Clean pain is where you go and do something that hurts, but you get why, and it's good for your body, and you enjoy the pain. Like I hate legs day, but I love that feeling of like, that I push myself. Your legs are aching, you're hobbling down the stairs. That's clean pain. Dirty pain is the KFC Zinger burger at 4 a.m. after you've been boozing, right? And then the subsequent hangover, right? That's dirty pain. That's like you've had a little bit of fun, but now you've got to pay the price. So mental health journey is very similar. You can either bottle it all up, push it down, and try and get away from it. That's dirty pain. You're hurting anyway, but you're not actually doing anything to address the root causes. Clean pain is doing the work. So there is an internal journey for all of us to take in our lifetimes, all of us. Life is not just one happy memory after the other. That's not what we signed up for. That's not what this is. You only have to read the books by some of the greatest people who've ever lived, and they'll all tell you the same thing. Life is not just one happy, lovely moment, one after another. Life entails going through things that are hard, and that those hard things are actually often quite important later when we learn how to get through them. And so I use the metaphor of the marathon, because one of the ways that I learned to deal with, so I ended up understanding in my training as a psychotherapist that I had complex trauma. Complex trauma means that I had many things happen to me as a childhood that were unrelated, that were all like piled up on one on top of the other. And it was my job to peel back the layers of the onion bit by bit by bit and look at those things and to kind of work through them and to feel them. And so I use the metaphor of the marathon because it felt like that. It felt like this wasn't a sprint that I was in for. This was a long journey, and I had to learn to pace myself, and I had to learn when to kind of ease off, and then I had to learn when to kind of go for it when I felt like I had the energy and the capacity to do the work. And so I learned to run. So it's not just a metaphor. I actually did do 2 marathons. I did London Marathon this year, very slowly. I'm a very slow runner, by the way. Nothing to be very proud of, but I did manage to stumble across the finish line. And Joe, you were there. So you were my one supporter who was there, and I did finish it. But the metaphor with a marathon is a really good one because there's only one way to do a marathon, and it's to do excuse my French, it's to do the fucking work, right? You need to train. You need to accept that you're going to be out in the rain. There's going to be days where you just do anything at all to not have to go out and pound the pavement. And yet you've got this date that's looming that, if you don't go and do the work, then the pain you're going to experience in trying to run, at such a long distance is going to be exponentially more difficult than it is to just do the little bite-sized training sessions. So I think it's the metaphor of a mental health journey is in that idea of the marathon. Do the little pieces of internal work, and so when you get to the big event, you'll be ready for it. And with the big event, what do I mean by that? I mean, like, stuff's going to happen in your life. You're going to lose a job. You're going to experience the loss of loved ones. A relationship might fail. Something's going to go pear-shaped. And if you are interested in your internal world, if you're interested in doing like a psychological and emotional training journey, if I could call it that way, gym for the mind and the body, if you're interested in that, then you're going to have what it takes. You're going to be able to get through this a lot quicker. And a lot quicker, or perhaps you're going to find the journey a lot easier. And I don't think we teach young people, or I don't think that's really something that exists in our society. We don't prepare people for the suffering of life, so that when it arrives, it knocks us for six. And for some of us, it's catastrophic. So I think we need to train more for mental and emotional distress, and we need to start doing that at a younger age and accept that it's absolutely going to happen.
I think the bit about loss as well, just the things that life throws at you. I often bring up the survey I did last year, and there are often issues of loss, partner loss, bereavement, job loss. But I often confuse that as, if you go for a breakup, I thought, oh, has that caused the depression? But actually, that was the time when all the things started to bubble up that happened before.
Yeah, so there is no thing called depression. So that's one I often get in my clinical work. Has this caused the depression? As though the depression is some kind of thing that exists inside us. So like a little bit of neuroscience, there is no chemical imbalance in the brain. That was a myth propagated in the 90s. It was disproven in the last couple of years. And you can do all of the Googling and research on that. There's lots of neurotransmitters in the brain. Serotonin is just one. And we know that, all of our experiences of the world are mediated by the chemicals in our body. So of course, things like serotonin and dopamine and adrenaline, they all play a role, but they're not the causes of diseases. That's a perspective. Some people think that might be the way that this is happening. The jury is still very much out. My personal perspective is you cannot look at the chemicals in a person's body in a vacuum. All of the biology in our body exists within a social context as well, exists within our world and our lives. And so this thing that we call depression, like, it's an important emotion that all of us experience to greater or lesser degrees. It's an experience of sadness. It's an experience of anger sinking down deeply inside us and not being looked at. It's an experience of kind of inertia, of not being able to move. Like, there's all different ways of characterizing this thing called depression. But the depression returning, I don't, as a psychotherapist, I don't understand what that means. I don't understand what it means. And I know that might be a controversial opinion. But what if it's a process? What if it's a verb and not a noun, right? And it's not a thing. It's something that you're going through. It's the story. It's not the object.
The British Psychological Society back you up. They had a report, they published a report called Understanding Depression, and they asked the question, is this an experience, a disease? And they said, we believe it's more helpful to see this as an experience. So I don't think it's a controversial opinion.
It's definitely an area that's contested in mental health. So there are broadly two worldviews in mental health. What do I mean by a worldview? There's two ways of kind of framing it, I guess. So the first worldview is more biological psychiatry, where we're talking about, okay, we think you have depression, we think it's a thing, and the response to that is to offer medication and to offer some kind of psychological therapy, and also nowadays also social prescribing. So things like you might want to join a boxing ring, you might want to join a choir, so they understand that that connection with people is really key. So these worldviews are not wrong or right, they're just ways of framing. So that's the first worldview. It's more of the medical framing. The other worldview is the one that I would call growth and transformation. It's more to do with looking at stuff that happened in your past, the bad things that went on, peeling back the layers of the onion and actually agreeing to kind of take a deep dive into your history, talking about it and understanding what things were painful and how they're kind of perhaps still living on inside you. And then process what we call processing the trauma or letting it out. And that can look like a lot of things in the therapy room. It can look like crying. It can look like yelling into a pillow. It can look like shaking. It can look like just, sitting there a bit stunned because you've realized something that you never understood. But all of that ultimately leads you to a place where things shift and change inside you. And that way of framing things is called growth and transformation. So either you're sick or you're on a journey and you're growing. Both are painful.
Yeah.
But I think the growth and transformation one might be a nicer way of framing it, because we know the growing hurts. Growing always hurts. Growing pains, right? Going to the gym hurts. Doing a workout hurts. But that doesn't mean that anything's wrong.
Yeah, and we've both. I like the idea of that, almost the biology at one side and the growth at the other side. And we've both started out at the biological side. I took an antidepressant too. The panic attack I told you about in Thailand, I went to the pharmacy. I'm by no means condoning this. I didn't know what I was doing, but I went to the pharmacy and the pharmacist was like, "Oh, would you like Valium or Xanax?" I just took Xanax. It quieted it down. And I'm not, that's a separate topic that I'm not qualified or informed to talk about, but I wouldn't do that again. And I didn't know what I was taking.
Yeah, well, you're taking a very addictive substance, a benzodiazepine, actually. So, and I'm not a psychiatrist either, but I do know that you can become very physically dependent on those medications and that they can end up creating more problems than they solve. Antidepressants, I guess, is another story because it's a doctor involved. And as I said, it can be a tool, and it can be a very useful and helpful tool for some people. It can also be a very difficult tool for others who struggle to stop using them. So maybe if we put medication to one side, I think that what we're really trying to say here is the real key to this, to understanding and to getting through this, is root cause. We need to understand why. Why do you feel like this? There is a reason. And there was one thing I can categorically say, I think, as a clinician. There are some people who say sometimes anxiety and depression just happen for no reason. No, there is absolutely no research at all to suggest emotions happen for no reason. I don't agree with that. I've never seen any research study on that worth its salt that would validate that opinion. Every single emotion that your body and mind is immensely wise and immensely, complicated. It's not going to give you signals for no reason at all, right? So if something's wrong, it's linked to a root cause. So then the question becomes not what's wrong, but what happened. And that's where we need to start looking at what happened.
And I think what's getting with the medications, we both started there and experienced what that was like. And now we're more at the growth side of the spectrum. And I just found it was the hope when I thought that, and for a while it gave me certainty. For a while it was quite, there's nothing I can do about this. I have this disease called depression. I have this chemical imbalance. But then eventually I was like, well, am I this way forever? It took like my ability to do something about it away, whereas the growth way, it's like, well, actually, no, there is work I can do, and that's not easy. That's also challenging. And that kind of leads me to another point, somebody said earlier. You shared your complex trauma, and it really resonated with me because sometimes when we talk about doing work and growth, it can almost be like we're telling the individual they need to do more. But there's one thing that I found helped me is it's like sometimes these shit things happen to you that aren't your fault and they're out of your control. but you're the only one that can do something about it. It is shit, but that's something that helped me.
Mm.
Um,
I really like what you said there, Joe, because you can't change what happened, but you can absolutely decide what your relationship to that pain is going to be now in the here today in the here and now. So Gabor Mate, whose book The Myth of Normal is one of the kind of books I would recommend anyone who's on kind of any kind of mental health journey or interested in the field read, because it's just such a important book, and he's one of the world's best trauma specialists. And Gabor's take on things is it's not about the event itself. Trauma, this word we use, trauma, so an adverse experience that happened in the past, it's not about the event. It's actually about the way our body responded to the event and how that's shaped us. So what do I mean by that? Two people can be in a car accident. One can be completely fine and walk away from it. The other person can have post-traumatic stress and be dreaming about it every night. The difference is one person's body became overwhelmed and another person's didn't. That's all it is. It's the nervous system. You go into fight, flight, freeze, adrenaline, cortisol's kicking off inside you, and either you come out the other side of that and you're all right, or it's like a moment in time gets frozen in your body and gets stuck there. That's kind of what a lot of trauma actually is. It's like someone's pushed pause on a frame of your life and left it paused inside you. And that paused kind of memory inside you is causing havoc, because it's like going, we're still in strife, we're still going to get through this. And actually, it's about helping your body to understand, no, that happened in the past. It's finished now. You can let all of that go. So the way I look at trauma processing is kind of like unpausing the freeze frame, letting all of that kind of those intense emotions and the biology kind of move into a place of kind of regulation.
I'm doing this work now, and that's why you've been so helpful to me along this journey. But I found that it wasn't for my own and everyone's experience, and I'm sure it's different, but the trauma was quite hard to access, to understand, and to see. But what I became clear to was the stories I started to tell myself, the negative stories, which I see in so many friends, and the survey I did, that the negative stories we tell ourselves when we're experiencing depression. I think that was on the back of the trauma. So I'm almost like it's like, oh, it almost feels a bit like a PlayStation game, and you're a few levels ahead to me, and there's no set way to get to the next level, but I'm trying to figure it out. But I'm going through this process now, and it's not, it is in my body as well. It's my body does these weird things sometimes, but it feels right.
Yeah. So trauma release is really interesting, because I went through trauma release in my psychotherapy training. So obviously what happens is on the training, you go a lot of in-depth psychotherapy. I had over 450 hours of psychotherapy to become a psychotherapist. And that wasn't even including all of the group work that I did with my colleagues, where, we would sit in a circle for an hour and a half once a month and talk about the worst things that have ever happened to us. And you do that enough, and your body starts to kind of go, oh, okay, we're going to look at this stuff, are we? So it starts to kind of throw it all up. Normally at 4 a.m. in the morning, I find, when, it's the 4 a.m. demons, we kind of call them, because that's often a time when things are quiet enough for your body to kind of throw things your way. But trauma release, yeah, so it can look like a lot of different things. Trauma is an interesting word, so maybe I just clarify that what we're talking about is something that was not a good experience that somehow stayed with you, that's kind of lives on inside you. That's all it is. And it doesn't matter what the experience is, because it's so subjective. So one person might get attacked by a dog and they love dogs and they don't care, and they got bitten, but it's fine, they brushed it off. Another person might have been petrified of dogs, might have had really difficult experience with animals when they were younger, and then gets attacked by a dog and then develops a phobia of dogs and can't be around dogs, and then subsequently can't go outside anymore. So things can go in completely different directions with the same experience. So the key thing is, like, everyone's bodies and minds are different. So just to reiterate, to say that, one more time, it's not about what happened. It's about how your body responded to what happened and how that's affecting you now. So yeah, going back to trauma release, things that happened to me, I had to start doing cold showers in the morning to regulate my nervous system. And I didn't understand why I was doing it at the time, but the cold water therapy was a really, really good way of kind of bringing myself into a state of deep relaxation. Then there was a lot of crying, I guess. I had a history of sexual abuse, by the way, so I'll talk about like at least that. I won't go into any detail, but it wasn't nice. It was pretty lot of shame around it as well. There was two instances that I think I uncovered. I never got to like the details of the memories, and I actually didn't need to know too much. I just knew that something very unpleasant and bad happened, and that was all I needed to know to kind of do the trauma release therapy. It was a lot of crying in the therapy room, shaking, kind of I guess my body just like letting it out, letting it go, almost like, you know, like when you clench, you know, you like clench your fists, you're so angry at something, and you kind of, there's this clenching that lives on inside you because you know that what happened shouldn't have happened and it shouldn't have been that way, and so you live with this kind of inner clenching. What I would say trauma release did for me is it gave me the ability to just say, "Do you know what? I'm not going to hold on to this anger any longer. I'm not going to hold on to this because anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's not hurting the people that hurt me. It's just hurting, I'm just hurting myself by holding on to all this stuff." So it was this big process of just like letting go, letting go, letting go. And so what I needed was like some practices, some kind of disciplines, so that when those things were happening, I didn't kind of fall to pieces. So cold showers was one, running was another. I shifted my food diet, my food and my diet into a different way of doing things. So I cut out sugar and caffeine. I didn't smoke, but those things, sugar, caffeine, and smoking, they're all kind of quite unhelpful when you're processing trauma. You need to kind of really be looking to get yourself into shape. Marathon's a good example again. If you're running a marathon, you're going to do certain things. It's the same. It's almost the same with trauma release. You do the same types of things. So I was eating lots of kind of really grounding foods like sweet potatoes, peas, greens, cutting out breads. As I said, not too much sugar. I was also doing psychotherapy. And if you can't get psychotherapy, then you can just get a group of people who will be prepared to listen to you as you do this work. You don't need to have a therapist. You can just find someone who you trust talking to. So that was another thing. I had the spiritual practice, spiritual with a little s. All I mean by that is an activity that brings you into the present moment. It could be surfing, could be boxing, could be running. Like for me, it was meditation. I think meditation is always a useful one, or a bit of yoga if you can stomach it. There's all sorts of yoga. There's manly yoga. So don't worry, you don't have to be doing kind of, you know, like anything you don't want to do. There's some really robust kind of energetic stuff out there that you can look at as kind of a bit more of a, you know, how do I put it? You know, I know what
There's a
guys,
yoga
I know
class.
what guys think of when they think of yoga.
There's a yoga class called Broga.
Broga, there you go.
Yeah, I've done it. I could get an injury playing football. I relate to that. That was the first step of the journey. Again, if you'd said to me at 26, you're going to be doing yoga,
Yeah.
I'd be like, come on,
Yeah.
not me.
Same thing.
But then I started getting injured playing football. This is the excuse I told myself. I think there was a bit more of curiosity underneath that I didn't let myself admit, but I kept getting injured playing football and I kept missing games.
Yeah, right.
So I started doing yoga because I heard the pros do it and it helped. But I walked out and was like, I am high on oxygen.
Yeah, right.
I remember being like, I feel amazing. Like it was, my body felt different. I felt high on oxygen and it was like a slippery slope thing. I was doing, joined the yoga studio. I did that at gym. Then I joined a yoga studio and there was a guy there that I just related to. He wasn't what you'd expect from a typical yoga teacher. And he did a meditation class. So I, do you want to try? So I tried that and I was like, wow, what's this? Like, it just felt amazing. I felt so calm and it was like, almost felt like I wasn't asleep, but I was completely rested.
Yeah, so yoga is brilliant because what it teaches you to do is to sit on the edge of difficult internal experiences. It teaches you about edges, you know, like, oh, I've got to stay with this pose a bit longer. I'm also doing CrossFit now. So I moved from running. So I did the couple of marathons and I was like, I just want to do something different. So I've upped the ante a bit. Now I'm doing CrossFit like 4 or 5 days a week, which is absolutely destroying my body. I'm 42 years old. So I'm having to do tons of yoga and mobility stuff, all of the type of stuff that's brilliant for trauma release, you know, therapy, trauma release, a trauma release journey. You don't have to be in therapy. So what I would say to any kind of guys out there who are thinking, this all sounds a bit kind of woo-woo, it's a pretty hardcore training regime. So if you're up for a bit of grit in your life, then you're going to experience tons of benefits if you can put some practices in place, both emotionally, psychologically, and physically, because all of those things are linked.
I'm glad you brought the guy thing up, and I I've not done this podcast just for blokes, at all. But I know we are the ones that are quite disconnected, well, very disconnected, often disconnected from our feelings.
Yeah.
Um, and you brought up your own experience of sadness. I really hope that I hope this podcast might have not solved a problem, but posed a question that I have and a frustration I have with society at the minute, where it seems like loads of celebrities have just decided it's all right for blokes to feel emotions now. Like, whoa, great. We're all just gonna, like, a switch has gone off, and now us blokes are just gonna share loads of emotions, but we've conditioned this our whole lives to push them down.
Yeah.
It's a really hard journey, and what you've done there, I think, is really powerful, because you've explained why might blokes feel their emotions, because I think that's the bit that gets missed off. And the
And
fact,
by that, you mean like, what's the good thing that comes out of feeling them?
yeah,
Right?
so and we spoke about it. It seems a bit back to front to be like, well, I'm going
Why
to
feel
look
the
into
pain?
my emotional pain.
Yeah. Why feel the pain? What I would say to that is the solution to the pain is in the pain,
Mm.
right? That's the key thing. The thing that you're looking for is in the very thing that you're running away from. And the minute you understand that, the minute you're going to turn towards this and go, right. And the internal phrase I have for myself is like, I agree to all of this. So I just say, I'm going to feel this pain. It's not going to go anywhere. I can't get rid of it. I can maybe numb it a little bit and to do stuff with medication for a little while, but eventually I have to face myself. So then I say, I agree to feel all of this. And the minute I did that, the whole thing kind of opened up and revealed itself to be something really useful and helpful. And dare I say, even something I'm now later grateful for, because ultimately what it did is it took me to a place where I'm now in the best I now would say I'm in probably one of the best places in my life. I've kind of found some equilibrium, but mental health is often about the scales being tipped one way and like things are not balanced. So if I could talk about like what I think mental and emotional distress is ultimately about, it's ultimately about something that's not balanced in your life. Something is off kilter. And so you've got to at least be prepared to look at the scales and go, what's weighing me down? What's pushing things in the wrong direction for me? The minute you're prepared to do that, you can then go, okay, well, this is not rocket science. I just need to make some adjustments and I can rebalance the scales into a place of, equilibrium. And that's ultimately what most mental health journeys are actually about. It's about becoming the person you were always supposed to be.
And you said something about, was it the key to the pain is in the pain?
Yeah, I would say that the solution to the pain is in the pain itself. So you have to be prepared to feel the pain and not run away from it in order to understand how to make it stop.
I found that. That
Mhm.
definitely relates to my experience.
So say a little bit about that. I'm interested to know what you mean.
To me, my pain has been a warning sign that something in my life hasn't been right or need to change. And your idea of balance, like working too much, going out drinking and not having enough connection, for me, it's connection. It's loneliness in connection. That's when I feel most of the anxiety and the pain. I don't think it's any coincidence I've started an organization called it Reconnect.
Yeah,
I
sure.
think that's so for me now, I really understand that, and I feel the pain, and it's like, well, what is it telling me? And it's a really hard thing. I think that's a really hard thing to do at the start when you haven't almost built up this skill set or understanding. It gets easier the more you do it, because sometimes you might think, what's this pain telling me? Sometimes I just don't know. And I find even that helps. Just be like, I'm feeling anxious. And my girlfriend's always like, why? I'm like, sometimes I don't know yet, but it often comes up. But I found my own experience is like the key is in the pain.
Yeah. And you can even get to a next step, which I did with anxiety, where I was like, oh, good, I'm feeling anxious. Because I was like, I knew that there was something really important happening. So I started to almost look forward to the anxiety. That fucks with the script in your head, right? The minute you go, I agree to the panic attacks. I like anxiety. Bring all of this on. I'm ready for it. Do your worst. Your brain doesn't know what to do with that. And so it kind of makes things a little easier for you. I know it sounds strange, but like resisting is like swimming up the river, right? You're swimming against the tide. That's the most painful part. So often the experience of depression, anxiety, that's not really as problematic as the story that we then attach to. Oh yeah, well I'm feeling this because I'm a loser and I brought this upon myself and I never do anything right and nobody really likes me anyway. Well, that's just a story. That's just a script that's running in your head. There's no truth to that, any more truth than you kind of give it. So the minute you kind of go, okay, I'm feeling this, I don't really like it, but you know what? I agree. Let's do this. Let's feel this. I agree to feel this. And I'm listening and I'm going to try and figure out what the message is. The minute you do that, you diffuse the whole thing. You take the fuel off the fire. So I think that, if you're going to have to feel the pain, you may as well agree to feel it.
I think it helps when you've got people and support around you. I think that's one of the key things for me. It's such a hard thing to go through alone.
That's why podcasts like this, I think, are so important, because there's a big community of people out there. And I know that the mental health support in the UK and around the world is hard to access. What I would say is that there are lots of things that are probably more helpful than going to see a psychologist, or more helpful than getting to the best doctor, in the country, and they're free. Like that Buddhist center that I found, in Southeast London. And there I found like a place of, yeah, like a home base to kind of start exploring this stuff from. So all you need to do is kind of think, what am I going to put? What activities am I going to put? What structures am I going to put? What kind of ways of working with the mind and the body am I going to put into my program? So I think of it like I keep coming back to the gym metaphor, because it's always felt to me like training. And so like if you've got a PT, your PT would write you a program. But there's so much available these days. You don't have to pay someone to do it for you. You can decide, okay, I'm gonna put, movement into my life. I'm gonna find someone who I have a trusting relationship with, and I'm gonna catch up with them once a week, and I'm gonna talk to them about what's going on. I'm going to watch or read a certain book, once a week, and get myself some bit of psychoeducation about things. I'm going to do some meditation, download an app. Some of them are free, just 10 minutes a day type thing. That's not to say that if you've got like, really difficult problems, that it's all going to be solved overnight, but at least there's this feeling of actually playing an active role in helping yourself to move through this. You're not a victim to everything that's happened to you. You're an active player trying to figure out what tools are needed, what components are needed to help make this bit more manageable. And everyone who embarks on that journey of agreeing to kind of do a bit of inner work, inner training, I almost find all of them very, very quickly start to really find this a lot easier. I think that's the message that I'm trying to get across in this podcast is, please don't run away from the internal messenger. Please listen, because the message is probably really important, and that's why you're hurting so much.
Wow. Yeah, honestly, that was powerful. And coming from you, because you're clearly a black belt in emotional pain. And if you, I'm not there
Oh,
yet.
mate, I'll take that one.
I'm not there yet. And the toolkit building thing's quite hard, because I said this in the podcast with Jake Mills that founded the Hub of Hope. I'll put a link to that, because that's an amazing place to start. If you're listening to this and you're feeling like, I'm going for this alone, I need to plug into others. We're doing loads of events and meetups, and I'll put a link in, so depending on what time you can see what the schedules are. But yeah, that's so encouraging. Wow.
Yeah. And my nonprofit is Safely Held Spaces, and we work with families of people in deep distress. So that's safelyheldspaces.org. And so people can always reach out to us if they're struggling and they want some advice. We do a lot of signposting. The Hub of Hope you mentioned, it's a great, one of the NHS's biggest signposting tools. It's just how to find the right support, but not just any old support, like different things you wouldn't think of as support. Talking therapy is only one way of working with like this thing we call mental health. For me, the more interesting ways are things you can actually enjoy, like getting in with a community of people, finding your tribe, realizing that we're all going to go through something hard in our life. You're not alone in this. But I think the lie that we tell ourselves is that we're the only person in the world, going through these experiences. The truth is, it's most of us at the moment, to be honest. I think it's most of us at some point or another, moving through or trying to work with something exceptionally difficult. So we need to pull together. We need to have a conversation about how, it's not up to a mental health professional to fix you. It's up to you to understand your story.
And if I could go back in your story, if you could go back to younger you, back on the dance floor, what would you say?
Yeah, so back to the nightclub, right?
Yeah.
Well, once I got out, once the very traumatic experience finished, and I was kind of left with the repercussions, the anxiety, I wish I could have gone back to my younger self and just said, relax. Just relax, man. Like, it's all going to be good. Try and enjoy this, because some of it's going to be really, really amazing. Some of it's going to hurt like hell. I'm not denying that, but you're strong enough. You got what it takes. I would just tell myself to relax.
And it sounds like the things that you value most in your life now have come on the back of these really awful experiences.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for these more challenging experiences because they showed me how strong I was. They showed me actually that I was capable of doing things that I never thought that I would be able to do. And so now I'm more up for the kind of adventure in life. You and I were talking about Joseph Campbell. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of him who's listening. He's this amazing mythologist. Actually, George Lucas brought him on board when they were writing Star Wars because he's a kind of expert in story. But if you ever jump on YouTube, Google something called The Hero's Journey, and it's really like a kind of template for this adventure we call life. And there's a really key part in the hero's journey, which is acceptance of the call. And what that is like, Luke Skywalker agreeing to kind of go and train as a Jedi. It's like me agreeing to, okay, I'm going to sign up for London Marathon. Like, it's like you agreeing to do your survey and to risk, all of the things that could happen, could go wrong by starting Reconnect. So it's the acceptance of the adventure. And why I think Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey is so important is because a lot of the suffering that is caused is when we try and put off the adventure. We leave the backpack on the floor, and we're not going to jump on the plane. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I know bad stuff could happen. I know you might get lost. I know that you might, one day be sleeping in a 5-star hotel, and the next day you've not been able to get accommodation, and you're kind of sleeping on the side of the road. That's life. But I would much rather be out there with my backpack on, like experiencing things and sitting at home wondering what could have been. And so if we translate that metaphor a little bit to internal work with your emotions, I would much rather not just drink and push all of my emotions down, 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 and just pretend that all these things that I'm feeling just aren't there. I'd much rather agree to like go on this internal adventure with myself. Everyone who I know who's done that has benefited, because I don't know how or why this happens, but the right characters tend to arrive at the right time, as you and I have arrived in each other's life. And you talk about how I'm sort of 2 levels up in a video game to you. I don't see it that way, actually, because I don't see it as hierarchical. I don't see that I'm anywhere near ahead or behind you. I just see that you and I are side by side in a boat, and we just happen to have ended up next to each other. And I'm like, oh yeah, watch out over there. There's a whirlpool, like sort of thing. And you're like, you've seen some of the things that I haven't seen, and you're bringing this world of kind of reconnect into my life and all of the benefits that come with that. So yeah, I think it's really about agreeing to go on an adventure with your fellow human beings. And, the most important part is not agreeing, but finding who the good ones are and connecting with them and holding on to them, holding on to your tribe. And life becomes a lot easier when you've got other people on the journey with you.
Put your backpack on, find the tribe. The solution's in the pain. You can drop the mic now and walk out.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you've stayed until the end, so you're basically part of our community now, and I need your help. I've paid for the whole of season 1 myself, and I am running on fumes now. I'm trying to raise 1,200 quid to cover the cost of season 2. Every penny will go towards creating episodes that help people who are feeling lost and alone. If you found this podcast helpful and you're able to chip in, then please do help us to help others. You can donate towards the cost of season 2 by heading to my Ko-fi page, which you can find in the show notes alongside some other resources. If you're in London and you want to join our Reconnect waiting list, go to reconnect.club, or if you'd like me to speak at your organisation, it's joetudor.com. Thanks for your help in growing the Reconnect community. Until next time, see ya.